Welcome, welcome. All right, guys, first and foremost, this is the homework for this week. I did not want to add this into the lesson because my lessons are already too big as they are. So this is the fall of Israel. So I went into there's a lot of detail in it. Now, you don't have to read this if you don't want to learn about this. If you don't want to learn about Israel, if you don't want to learn about how Israel fell and what the Bible says about it, then yeah, you don't have to read it. It's not a big deal. But if you do, you can ask Mr. Man down here. He read it and actually helped me with it. So, good job. Was it good? See? There you go. There you go. There's a good, happy consumer. All right, so today, we need to do this. Today we're going to see two different sides of God. Two completely different sides of God. You know, Ascites the philosopher says, and if you did the homework earlier in the Ascites the philosopher, he said, you know, enemies God has none because who could stand against him? We're going to see when God puts you as an enemy, it's not a good thing. And we're going to see that today. But we're also going to see God's love coming through his people and how he loves and actually utilizes this stuff for his own purposes. Remember, every single thing in the Old Testament God did, he did for a purpose. Quite often in the New Testament, we're going to find out what that purpose is, and we're going to do that today. So, let's move along. Oop, other way. Green. All right, so we've got to cover some ground first because if we don't do this early stuff, you're not going to get the whole picture of what we're going to be talking about. So please, make sure you pay attention to this so you can get everything together. So, all right, Neo-Assyrian Empire. We're really talking about Assyria. Now, there are 3 books in the Bible that actually, if you want to think about it, it would be 4 books in the Bible that do not talk about Israel. One is Esther. That was in Israel. That was actually at Xerxes. It was in Persia. The book of Obadiah talks about Edom. Nahum and Jonah talk about Assyria. Okay? So God is not just interested in Israel all the time. He's also interested in everybody else too. So there's very many things he talks about, and we're going to even go into some of those next week. So the Neo-Assyrian Empire was really a very, very, very bad place. We're going to go into that. Now, some of this is going to be rated R today. But I think to help you understand Jonah and Nahum, we've got to cover some of that. So we know that, like we talked about last week, Tiglath-Pileser, he was the guy who kind of got everything started. He was the one who started expanding, going everywhere. Sargon II, he was the one who took Israel. Took Israel away. Sennacherib, he actually moved to Nineveh, and Nineveh is now the capital at this point. And then these last guys, Ashurbanipal we're going to see a lot of him next week when we start talking about Babylon. So Ashurbanipal is going to be a big part of that in Babylon's, of how that happens. So, the first evil empire. When I first read that, I was like, wow. We think about, what they say, the evil empire. We think about, Russia or Germany or whatever. But, the first really, really evil empire was really Assyria. So here below are some pictures that actually come from the city of Nineveh. And also, I believe it comes from the city of Ashur, their original capital. But what they do is they depict torture committed against conquered people. These guys didn't just talk about it. They flaunted it. They put it on their cities, along with the flayed skin of the people they flayed, draped over their city walls. Yeah, it's bad. It's bad. So if you get a chance to ever really read about what some of the things, and what I'm going to recommend is the article we're going to go through here in a second. Please read it, and your eyes will be this big. Okay. So The following we're going to talk about is going to come from the Biblical Archaeology Society, which is a great, great place, great resource to learn about stuff. And this lady, Erica, she actually wrote this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from some of it. Now, understand what I'm reading from is direct sources from Assyria. They wrote it. So you're only kind of commenting on a few things. Everything we're going to read is what they wrote. So let's go into this. And I'm sorry it's rated R, but all right. So starting out, in one case, when a city resisted as long as possible instead of immediately submitting, meaning that they held out for a few years or so, Ashurbanipal proudly records his punishment of them. Basically, we conquered you, now here's your punishment. I flayed, cut the skin off, as many nobles as had rebelled against me, draped their skins over the pile of corpses, spread some out within the pile, and some I erected on stakes upon the pile. I flayed many right through my land, draped their skins over my walls. That's a direct quote from Ashurbanipal. Again, he put the skins of the people over the walls of the city. This guy, guys, the whole thing, this is all shock factor, but the reality is they did that because when they come to your city and you knew what they were doing, sure, come on in. No, we're not going to fight against you guys. No, man, we want our lives. So I felled 50 of their fighting men with the sword, burnt 200 captives from them, defeated in battle on the plain 332 troops. With their blood, I dyed the mountain like red wool. I carried off the captives' possessions. I cut off their heads of their fighters, built a tower before their city with their heads. He did a head tower. Burnt and then, I'm sorry to say this, burnt their adolescent boys and girls. They didn't care. This reminds me, when I was working for the state lab, and I was going through my laboratory training, and I was working for the state lab in New Mexico, they're saying, well, they would take all these heads of animals, and they would actually cut part of their brains out to look for different diseases. And so what they would do is when they're finished with the heads, they would take it downstairs to their head vat. Seriously, there's this big old thing in here. You just throw all the heads in there, and they would look in there, and all these guys are looking back at you. Mostly more dogs and cats. It was really scary. But anyway, so I can imagine what these guys went through because I saw the head vat. Not a good thing. All right, let's move on. A description of another conquest is even worse. Jeez, worse than that? In strife and conflict, I besieged and conquered the city. I felled 3,000 of their fighting men with the sword, captured many troops alive, cut off their arms and hands. Ouch. Noses, ears, and extremities. I gouged out their eyes of many troops. We know this to be true because that's what they did to some of the people in Israel. They gouged their eyes out. Or at least one of them. The idea is, you're never going to be able to fight us again. A one-armed man can't do a lot against an army. So, an Assyrian soldier grasping the hand of one of the armed, captured enemy, whose other hand and both feet have already been cut off. He grabbed it. Dismembered hands and feet fly through the scene. They're throwing their hands and arms and feet. Woohoo! Here, grab the arms, cut off hands, they're throwing it around. I mean, this is like a horror movie. Another captive is impaled on a stake. Stake, captive on top. His hands and feet are already cut off. Another in detail said, we see 3 stakes, each driven through 8 severed heads. So they had a head stake, not a brain, not a cooked brain, but a head on a stake. Each driven through heads set up outside the conquered city. Notice, shock factor. Outside the conquered city. Anybody walks by they go by in their camel. they're going to say, oh my gosh, don't mess with Assyria. That was really the idea. Each driven through 8 7 heads, set outside the city. A third detail show a row of impaled captives lined up on stakes on a hill outside of the captured city. In an inscription from Shalmaneser III's father, Ashurbanipal II, the latter tells, I captured soldiers alive, erected them on stakes before their cities. Again, this is direct sources from them. All right. Now, I hope by now I'm not going to go in anymore because I figured that's enough. Okay, I could have went. There's a lot more to it than that, a lot more. But I hope you understand when I say this is the empire of evil. Okay. Now, with that in mind, it's no wonder why Jonah ran the other direction, because that's what he did. Okay? God says, you need to go to them and tell them to repent. And Jonah's saying, you are crazy. I'm out of here. Now, do you understand why I did that? This is what he had to deal with. He knew this. I wouldn't want to go to Nineveh. Are you kidding? That's nuts. So, word came, go to the great city of Nineveh against it. But Jonah ran away and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Oppa, which is a city in Israel at that time. Found a ship for that part. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish. Now, it's not Tarsus. Tarsus is where Paul was from. Saul of Tarsus, Paul of Tarsus. He was from Tarsus. This is Tarshish. Really, 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 really different place. Let me show you why. We're talking, it was 2,500 miles away. This was on the other side of Europe. This is the farthest that civilization at this point. They were really over that way. That's the farthest. Basically, you couldn't get much farther away than this on a ship. Okay? Because if you see, that's Spain. And then there's the Mediterranean. You got Italy, got the boot of Italy. All right. Now, Nineveh was only 550 miles. If you go a straight direction, it's about 650 if you go the regular route, because they can't just usually go through the desert. A lot closer is Nineveh than Tarshish. So, and I noticed it circled up there. That's where see my little circle. That's where Tarsus is, and I did that purposely because that's where. So we don't want to think that Saul of Tarsus is over here. Tarsus is up there in Turkey, and Tarshish is way over in Spain, way over there. He tried to get a long way, and I don't blame him. So, casting lots. So what happened then is the sailor said, the storm came. It was throwing the ship all over the place. And they're going, what the heck? Now remember, these are polytheistic people. The gods cause everything. But in this case, it's true. God did cause it. Okay? Because remember polytheism, they were blaming the gods did everything. They said there was a God for this, God for that, God for this. But in this case, they were right. So what they did is they cast lots. Basically, it was a way of just kind of a way of trying to figure out who is the problem. Now, to be honest, this most of the time divination. Remember we talked about polytheism, how divination and those things are not. God says absolutely not. Don't do it. This is one of the things that God allowed them to do, okay, is lots. But, so the thing is, it fell upon Jonah. Duh. Again, guess who's behind all of that? God is. He made sure it did that. Then they said, dude, what kind of work do you do? What is wrong with you? You're the one causing all of this. And he said, I'm a Hebrew and worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Now, if you went through my polytheism course, notice he literally said everything is created by this one God. Remember polytheism? There was a God of the sea, God of the upper sea, middle sea, lower sea, God of this land, God of this land, God of this land, God of this land. By this time, Jonah's like, there's only one God, guys. and I serve him. So this terrified them. What have you done? Ultimately, whose fault was it? Jonah's. So they knew he was running away from the Lord because he already told them. So they worship, but specifically, they worship Yahweh. He was worshiping Yahweh. Remember, Yahweh is that is God. That is the God of all the earth. Elohim would be Lord God Almighty, which would not necessarily mean Yahweh. Elohim, but Yahweh is always that. And the thing is, when they said they were running away from the Lord, they specifically said, you're running away from Yahweh. So then it gets worse. All right, and finally he said, all right, because the guy was he wasn't evil. He realized, you're right, God's doing this. Pick me up, throw me into the sea, and it'll become calm. Now, remember when we talked about in polytheism, you don't make the gods mad. You got to avoid that at all. They would have 2,000 people searching for the will of the gods to try to make it so they don't make them mad. Because that scared people to death. You don't want to make the gods mad. So that's why they did this. I know it's my fault. The great storm had come upon you. Instead, the men did their best to row back to shore. They knew he was a man of God. They do not. We do. If Yahweh's causing this kind of storm, I don't want to make him mad. Remember polytheism. That's the idea, is don't do that. But they saw it got worse and worse, and there was literally, God truly made it so there's no way they would have made it back. No matter how much they tried, God was going to make it so they can't. Because the idea is what God wanted to have happen. Again, everything God does has a purpose. Everything. Then he says, please, Lord, by the way, that's Yahweh. Please, Yahweh, they said, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Because throwing a person overboard in the Mediterranean Sea, for the most part, is going to kill somebody. What else could you do? It's not like you can swim to shore. Who knows how far out they are? They could be hundreds of miles. You're not getting back. You're going to die. Okay, become fish food. So that's what they thought was going to happen. So then they took Jonah and threw him overboard. All of a sudden, once they threw him overboard, sea got calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered sacrifice to him and made vows to him. Now, interesting, nothing like seeing God in action to get your eyes focused on him. Remember, we talked about that. And if you read my paper from last week, why does God allow hard times? Okay, from last week, why does God allow hard times? It's because of stuff like this. Because he wants you to focus on him. He wants to get your attention. And I'm going to guarantee it worked. It got their attention. And when they see God's miracle doing that, these guys were not Israelis. But remember, God still cares for them. So Jonah gets swallowed up. Then he goes into this long prayer to God. I'm not going to go into that. So, and after 3 days, he was vomited up, barfed up by the fish. All right, so I kind of threw this in here. As a biochemistry guy, hydrochloric acid, which is pH about 1 to 2 in the stomach, it's going to make your skin pretty nasty. And not only that, you're going to be sitting in water for 3 days. You're going to look wrinkly. He's going to come up, and I don't think anybody's going to want to come near him. He probably looks like a monster at this point because he's been in a fish for 3 days with all the junk. Anyway. So the next problem, we got to get to Nineveh. And so what he did is he caught the first airline going there and got on, and it took him about 2 hours to get there. I don't think so. He walked 600 miles. And if you've seen the desert of Iraq, you'll understand that 600 miles walking in the desert of Iraq is not very fun at all. So, but the thing is, God reminded him, okay, here we are again. Like I told you, Jonah. Now remember, God is very patient with him too. Because God doesn't say, you jerk, why didn't you do what I told you to do? He didn't say that. All he said was, all right, Jonah, look, go back and do what I told you to do. Okay, go on ahead, please. And he did. Kindness. So, when he got to Nineveh, Nineveh was huge. They believed it was 60 by 60 square, 60 miles long, 60 miles wide. It thing was humongous. There was also a big moat around the city, huge body of water around the city. Because here, even in Jonah time, it says it took him 3 days to walk through the city. 3 days. That city is huge. You can walk through, excuse me, I'm from Colorado, Lancaster, in a day, easily. No, you can't do that with these guys. So, Jonah began going a day's journey into the city, proclaiming 40 more days and Nineveh will be overthrown. And the Ninevites believed him. Wow. Fast was proclaimed, and all of them, and the greatest of the least, put sackcloth on. When Jonah's warning reached the king of Nineveh, he rose from his throne, covered himself with sackcloth, sat down in the dust. That was just the idea. The idea of humbling yourself was doing that. That was what people did in humbling themselves. Like we would do, we would kneel, we would bow down. There's things we do specifically. That's how they did it. So, and then on top of that, he made a proclamation. Don't eat. Don't let the animals eat. Don't let anybody do this. What that shows is he didn't just sit down and said, God, I'm sorry, get back up and go away. He actually followed through. 3 days, in there. The whole place did it. They completely humbled themselves. So God relents. When God saw what they did and how they turned from the evil ways, he relented and did not bring destruction on them. Wow. We see that a lot in the Bible. We see that with people like Manasseh, bad king. Ahab, bad king. God had mercy on them. But Jonah, this seemed very wrong. He got really angry and said, what are you doing, man? These guys, this is the Assyrians. They drape people, they put people's heads on stakes outside. Okay? He was pretty upset. But then again, let's think about that for a minute. Let's look at a different perspective. What if God told you to walk into Nazi Germany during World War II, by the way? Hitler was a very evil, you know anything about Hitler? He was a really bad guy. Went to Goebbels, went to Himmler, all those guys. You walk in there and I want you to go tell them to repent. That's my point. You're like, yeah, right. And here's the key, though. The point of all of this, even though they've killed millions of people, God would, if they repented, God would forgive them. Would you not be a little upset about that? Why aren't you judging them, God? Next week's lesson. When we go through Habakkuk. That's going to be the issue with Habakkuk. Why are you not judging them? They're evil. That was what Jonah. So we shouldn't get mad at Jonah. I would have thought the same thing. Knowing how bad Nineveh was, you don't want to do that. But God had a purpose. What was the point? Well, we see that in Matthew. Then some Pharisees and teachers of the law said to him, "Teachers, we want to see a sign from you." Now, you've got to understand, by this time, Jesus has probably did 1,000 signs. What the heck is your problem? Then he said to him, now remember we talked about last week, an adulterous generation. When God talks about adultery, that means he said, you're going to other gods instead of me. You're going somewhere else but to me. That's an adultery to him. Because you are supposed to love him as much as he loves you, like a marriage. But no sign will be given except for the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah was in the 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in. Okay, he'll be dead and comes back to life. Now, that was the first thing that Jonah. So he used Jonah as an object lesson. No, first one. Now there's the second object lesson. The men of Nineveh will stand up at judgment against you, he's saying, this generation, and condemn it. Nineveh, the evil empire, will stand up against you. Jesus was pointing. I'm sure Jesus was pointing at them. For they repented because of the preaching of Jonah. And now, they repented because Jonah was a prophet. Because they believed, they said, okay, we know this is from God, we better do what he says. Now Jesus says, here I am God. I'm doing miracles, and you guys don't even care. Now notice how God used Jonah's thing. Remember, everything in the Old Testament God did for a reason. Sometimes for multiple reasons. But we shouldn't be surprised, because we should also see who is at work by asking the question. Matthew 4:1-7. When Jesus was led by the Spirit to the wilderness, he was tempted by the devil 40 days, 40 nights. The tempter came to him and said, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones to bread. He basically just said, give me a sign. Not good. And of course, Jesus says, it's written, man shall not live on bread alone. The devil took him up into the high point of the temple and said, throw yourself off, for he'll command his angels concerning you. Jesus says, it's also written, don't put the Lord your God to the test. That's what they did. They put him to the test. And that, by the way, that's actually from Leviticus. So anyway, so we see that the devil, so we know who's actually talking. Because that's exactly what Satan did to Jesus prior to this. So we should not be surprised that the Pharisees come and say the same things that the devil said to them, because who else could be commanding to do those kind of things, in a sense. All right, now we're going to switch directions. We now saw God's love for Nineveh and how God used it for his purposes. He forgave them. He allowed them to go on, everything else. Now it's judgment time. All right, Nahum is all about the fall of Nineveh. And let me tell you, it is graphic. And there is in 3 chapters, there's a ton of information in there. So we're going to go through some of it. All right, Neosir was 200 years old. Its capital Nineveh fell, combined with the force of the Medes from the east and Babylon from the west. They came against it. We'll talk about this next week in lots of detail. But see, the thing is, before Nineveh fell in 612, Nahum already had it prophesied 40 years earlier. And what's interesting, you're going to see here in a minute, is that everything that Nahum said 40 years earlier literally came true. But then again, we shouldn't be surprised, because God does that all the time. In Isaiah, he did it constantly. He talked about Cyrus the Great. He talked about Babylon. He talked about all kinds of things hundreds of years before it happened. So, the Lord's anger against Nineveh. The Lord is a jealous and avenging God. Wow, that's very different than what he did with Jonah. Okay? The Lord takes vengeance and filled with wrath. The Lord takes vengeance on his foes and vents his wrath against his enemies. The Lord is slow to anger, but great in power, and the Lord will not leave the guilty unpunished. So, one thing I always like to tell people is universalism, meaning that everybody's going to be saved in the end, is a bunch of junk. Because God does not leave the guilty unpunished. And again, when we go to Habakkuk next week, please keep this in mind, because this is the exact thing that's going to be dealing with, was that. So God does not leave it. So not everybody, so we can just, instead of someone saying, it's kind of like, watching the View show, and they're like, well, it doesn't matter what God you serve. You can just serve anybody because he just loves everybody. Yes, ma'am? Well, no, they didn't. It wasn't like what they were doing is they're acknowledging him as God. Remember, these guys were.
They were not Israelites.
Right, that's the key. They were not Israelites. But you remember, if you went through the polytheism class, we talked about they had hundreds of gods. So them recognizing God as the one and only God is a complete shift. Big difference.
But they thought God did have mercy on them because
Well, no, what they were afraid of is not to make him mad. Because in the polytheism lecture, we talked about in detail, we went through and said, you don't want to make God mad, and these guys would do all this kind of stuff, even put people in the king's place and all this stuff, not to make the gods mad. You were afraid of that because if they're afraid that God's going to kill them. They were afraid that God's going to, because this is God, man of God, and they're going to throw a man of God in river. Not good. So, all right, Nahum. This is what the Lord said. Although they have allies and are numerous, let me tell you, Assyria had a lot of allies. They will be destroyed and pass away. Although I have afflicted you, Judah. Now it's interesting. Think about this. Nahum is actually pronouncing this, but telling it to Judah in this. So interesting the way to think about that. Now I will break their yoke from your neck and tear your shackles away. Okay? The Lord is giving. So you will have no descendants to bear your name. Ay, ay, ay. What that means is he's talking to the Ninevites. I'm not only going to wipe you out, I'm going to wipe you out, and so I'm going to have all your kids, everything's gone. They're all gone. No descendants are going to go with you because we're done, and he doesn't mess around. And this is interesting. I will destroy the images and idols. I will prepare your grave, for you are vile. God said that. God said that. You are vile. Wow. That's pretty hardcore. So, Nineveh summons her troops, yet they stumble on the way. Remember, he's saying this 40 years ahead of time, so he's telling this is what's going to happen. By the way, these are the walls of Nineveh. This is the real walls, actually. So understand, this is what these... So I put that picture up there because this is actually what they were talking about. The protective shield put in place. The river gates are thrown open. The palace collapses as it is decreed that Nineveh be exiled and carried away. Remember what they did to the people. Remember, and again, if you please make sure you read this because this is going to go into what they do. Assyria would take you and they would carry you away. They would send you in exile. And God is basically saying to them, it's time for payback. Yeah, because they took people away, same thing's going to happen to them. Now, Nineveh had a large moat around the city and a river running through the middle of it. This was a huge place. They had a big river going through the middle of it. So, but the thing is, it's talking about the gates are going to be crashing. Nineveh is going to be exiled. It's going to be all destroyed. Now, one other thing, I'm just going to throw this in here because Nahum mentions this, but I got to go into a little backstory to help you to understand it. So what happened was the Assyrians, one of the places they went after was Thebes, which was that, where on the pyramids, where all the pyramids and the guy and the little, lion sitting on there in Egypt, was Thebes, okay, during that time. So Thebes, they thought was indestructible. They figured nobody could take Thebes. Nobody. They couldn't take them out. So the thing is, what God's saying here, watch this is, are you better than Thebes, situated on the Nile, with water around her? That sounds like Assyria too. The river was her defense. Sounds like Assyria, because remember they had a river going through there. The waters, her wall. Cush and Egypt were her boundless strength. There's a lot of people down there and a lot of time, and it's hard to get there. No one, it was kind of like one of the things, we're never going to be conquered. Right. Put and Libya were among her allies. Yet she was taken captive and went into exile because of the Assyrians. These guys thought they were impregnable. I mean, it was bad. These guys were they thought their defenses were so good in Thebes, but Assyria took them out. So what God is doing is reminding Assyria, hey, you did it to them, I can do it to you. So, let me see where Thebes is there. So, the Lord is good, a refuge in time of trouble. He cares for those who trust in him. But with an overwhelming flood, he will make an end to Nineveh. So archaeologists believe that it was a flood that actually started all of this. Okay? And because they had a river going through, this is Nineveh. You see a river going through it. They had a river. They believe what happened is that they had a flood that broke down some of the walls, and so the people had an easier time getting in because it was pretty much impregnable. But now because of that, he will pursue. Now this is interesting also with God. He will pursue his foes into the realm of darkness, meaning, man, you're going to die, and I'm still coming after you. Basically, God's trying to tell the people, we're going to get rid of you. You're gone. You are the most evil place in the world, and I'm going to take care of you. Okay? So they really thought that it actually was a flood. Now, I was reading one archaeological thing. It says some of the archaeologists were saying, oh yeah, there's no way a flood. It was in August. There's no way the flood could have did that. Well, and I thought to myself, that's not true, because on July 31st, 1976, the Big Thompson flood that I was in that killed 148 people was not supposed to happen. And it did. The Texas flood was not supposed to happen, but it did. And everybody said, ooh, that's not going to happen. So the key is, guys, if God says it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And I've seen it. Whoa, there's no sound. Oh, man.
Canyons of razor-sharp rock, unpredictable gravitational conditions, unexpected eruptions, things like that.
Okay, so the scariest environment imaginable. Thanks. That's all you gotta say, scariest environment imaginable.
So, whatever they plot, now this is Nahum, whatever they plot against the Lord, he will bring to an end. Trouble will not come a second time. Remember we talked about, if you guys did the homework and you read, again, Astrodites, the philosopher, he said, enemies God has none. Meaning, God don't have no enemies. Why? Who could stand against him? God's not worried. Well, oh my gosh, the devil's going to do this, or this country's doing this. Wow, what am I going to do? No. God, he just whoosh, wipes them out. There's nothing. And now look, trouble won't come a second time. That's a scary thought. Meaning, he takes care of the job the first time. Many times, we can say, for instance, World War I, we say, if they would have went into Germany, took it, then Hitler wouldn't have came. They did not take care of it the first time. So they had another war. Okay? What they're saying is, God, when he does it, he says, I only have to do it one time. It's done. Now, with all this in mind, we need to see that God is really a dichotomy, but the key is God is powerful. He is love. He is kindness. But there is an end to that. There's a point where there's an end. So universalism, and I always like to say, these universalist churches, like the Unitarian Church and all that kind of junk, that is it's yuck. It's not true because the Bible does not say that. God is merciful. Most of the Bible, God is merciful. Most of the Bible, God is compassionate. He's long-suffering. And again, we're going to talk about that next week with Habakkuk. God, what are you doing? When are you going to act? But the key is, guys, He does. And when he does, he doesn't have to do it a second time. Because, again, we see all the time. We got to remember, one of the problems in polytheism was they thought the gods were like men, so they figured the gods were just as fallible as men are. But that's not true. God says so many times, I am not a man that I should blank, blank, blank. Tell a lie, change my mind. He says that multiple times in the Old Testament. God specifically says, I'm not a man. He says that because in polytheism, everybody thought gods were just like men. God is not like a man. He's compassionate. He's merciful. But he's also has an end to it. And we see that with Nineveh. But again, we can understand why. Because now when you read Nahum, then you're going to, and Jonah, you're going to understand because you now know about Assyria, how bad they were. Now it's going, when you read it, you'll be shocked because you'll read it with clarity. All right, and guys, I purposely made this a little bit shorter today. Woo, I know, we're not here like 10 minutes late. Are there any questions? I'd love to answer any questions of this if you guys like.
Just some still in my mind. Okay, so he destroyed Nineveh by flood.
Well, no, the flood helped get it started.
The flood helped.
Flood helped because when you have, let me show you the walls. See the walls? See that moat? It's really hard to get in. So how many? I mean, it's not like you have a motorboat that's going to drive and take you across there. So these guys literally had to walk across and get in. How do you get into there? Well, if you have an opening in the wall because a flood destroys the wall, now you have an opening to walk right in. That's what they believe because it was pretty much considered to be unpregnable. But that's why God even mentioned Thebes because they said, hey, you guys did it to Thebes, I can do it to you. Any other questions? All right, guys, thank you so much. Make sure you get, read, this is a good information to look at the fall of Israel. And next week, we are going to begin Babylon. And we're going to start going to Babylon because I think we're going to have like around 3 or 4 more classes left. So Babylon is next week, Habakkuk and Zephaniah next week. And other than that, thanks, guys. Have a good day.